morning, Chairman Stewart and Ranking Member Bonamici. Thank you for the opportunity to share my concerns regarding the proposed amendments to ERDA, or the Environmental Research Development and Demonstration Authorization Act of 1978. The changes described in the amendments, I believe, would slow down the work of the EPA Science Advisory Board, which I'll refer to as SAB, remove long-standing and widely accepted practices for dealing with conflicts of interest, and reduce expertise. Congress articulated broad requirements for balance, independence, and transparency in the Federal Advisory Committee Act. FACA instructs agencies to ensure committees will not be inappropriately influenced by special interests. Currently, all the members of EPA's SAB are appointed as special government employees and subject to most of the government's ethics rules. They are required to report information about income, activities, assets, liabilities, it's quite a long list, and to answer questions regarding causes for impartiality and previous involvement in public statements on issues under consideration. Conflict of interest applies to financial interests. Bias applies to intellectually or ideologically motivated points of view. They're different. Conflict of interest should be eliminated. Bias should be managed by appointing a committee such that a balance of perspectives is achieved, except for when a perspective is far from the mainstream or the individual is unable to consider other points of view. It is important to collect sufficient information from candidates and obtain public input so that the designated federal officials can make their best determinations on these issues. On to a couple of provisions in the discussion draft. Inserting risk or hazard assessment in ERDA expands the scope of the SAB's work to potentially include every risk or hazard assessment proposed by the agency. This would overwhelm already limited resources and delay assessments. When these assessments can, when necessary, be reviewed by other means, why add this? Holding a public information gathering session before major advisory activities to discuss the state of related science will consume time and resources. Since the SAB meetings are open to the public with time set aside for their oral comments, the board accepts their written comments and will be discussing the state of the science. What value does this add? Requiring SAB to respond in writing to public comments is a burden and distraction, given that special interests could arrange to have thousands and thousands of comments submitted every week. Since committees read and respond to written public comments in the final report content and to oral comments during the proceedings, what does this add? If persons affiliated with entities that may have a potential interest in the board's activities are not excluded from the board, but simply required to fully disclose the conflict, the objectivity of an advisory committee and the public's trust in the advice rendered are irrevocably damaged. Scientists are not immune to influence by their financial prospects. Conflicted experts can influence panel decisions by their voting, by dominating the discussion, and by pressuring other panelists. Disclosure of individual and institutional financial relationships is a critical but limited first step. Disclosure does not resolve or eliminate conflicts. When a scientist has irreplaceable expertise but has a conflict, that expert can be invited to present to the committee without serving on the committee. The provision requiring that at least 10% of the membership of the board be from state, local, or tribal governments sounds like stakeholder representation and could be interpreted to mean that these members of the SAB would be appointed as representatives rather than special government employees. And they would not be subject to most of the government ethics rules and hence able to serve without disclosure of conflicts of interest. There are reports from the Government Accountability Office, Bipartisan Policy Center, and Keystone all state that members of committees that consider scientific and technical issues should be appointed as special government employees. If experts cannot participate in the advisory activities that potentially involve review of their own work, even if their work is one of hundreds of studies under consideration, some specialized experts would be disqualified. Standard practice among federal agencies and the national academies is to recuse scientists from peer review of their own work, but allow those scientists to serve on the committee. Just a couple of four quick recommendations. The Bipartisan Policy Center report and Keystone report have extensive recommendations, so I'm just going to go through four that I believe are critical. All federal scientific advisory panels and subcommittees, including those put together or managed by contractors, should be subject to FACA and have all members appointed as special government employees. The goal of agencies should be to appoint only panelists who do not have conflict of interest. This is reinforced in the Bipartisan Policy Center report as well as the Keystone report. An agency should select panel members based on their expertise and on their ability to contribute to the panel deliberations without conflict of interest or undue bias. Again, Bipartisan Policy Committee and Keystone. Waivers should be publicly available and only issued as rare temporary exceptions, and panelists with waivers should not be allowed to serve in leadership positions. And finally, panel chairs should remind panelists at every meeting to disclose new or previously undisclosed information relevant to determining conflict of interest or bias. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer questions.